All right. So, welcome to everybody, and especially to Natalie Jenner, our author for this evening. I'm Gina Alexandris. This is the Career Conversations Book Club for September 24th, and we are talking about this wonderful novel, Every Time We Say Goodbye. Um, each year that I've done this, I have included a novel, and some people wonder, what does a novel have to do with career conversations? And I think you will agree by the end of these 90 minutes that the conversation about the book, about Natalie and her career, certainly relate to career conversations, and they fit quite well in terms of the conversations that we're going to have. So I'm going to start just with a little bit of an introduction to the evening, and then I'll go into an introduction of our author for today, and then we're going to get right into the book and into our conversation. Reminder that this particular idea of coming up with a Career Conversations book club was something that I did to really meld the three interests that I have: books and reading, powerful career conversations, and bringing people together in community. And I think community is something that really resonates in this book as well and really shows up in this book as well. If you'd like, feel free to post your thoughts if you're watching this later on with a hashtag GA Career Conversations. We'll soon hear from Natalie, who I'm thrilled to have, but just a few quick notes about the format. As a reminder, for those of you who are either new or who are watching later on, the format for tonight takes place sort of in thirds. First, we're going to speak to Natalie about her career, then we're going to dive into the book, and then we're going to open it up for questions from others who might have questions with her. For those who are joining us today, I'd ask that you please keep your microphones muted until that last third of the session. If you have any comments or any questions, though, during the time, please feel free to use the chat that is available through Zoom. That is something that you can do at any time. We are recording the session to share later on, as I've mentioned. And for any Ontario lawyers watching it currently or later on, this session is eligible for 90 minutes of professionalism from the Law Society of Ontario. And the last thing that I wanted to say is that about the participation and sort of some ground rules. My goal in these conversations always is to inform, to learn together, to have open and brave and powerful conversations, and respecting one another in the process. I want to acknowledge the work of author Elise Ahakora, whose article reminded me when I had first read it about a year and a half ago that brave spaces can sometimes be exhausting for individuals. And so instead of suggesting brave spaces, I've converted my thinking to accountable spaces in which we all are responsible for ourselves, our intentions, our words, and our actions. And it does mean coming into a space with good intentions and understanding that aligning our own intent with action is the true test of commitment. So to that extent, I remind us of the ground rules and accountable space guidelines that I had sent along previously. So with that, on that note, I want to introduce Natalie Jenner to this evening. Good morning, good evening, Natalie, and welcome to our career conversations.
Hi, Gina. Thanks so much for having me here tonight.
It is such a pleasure. And many people I speak with oftentimes will tell me that one of the things that they are curious about and that they learn from is hearing about other people's career path, career trajectory. So, what I wanted to ask you is, you've got a really interesting background that has led you to where you are today. If you wanted to share with us parts of your incredible career journey as author, bookstore owner, professional development coach, lawyer, and there might be other things that I'm not aware of. Share with us the highlights and how you transitioned and the why you transitioned from one to another.
Sure. I mean, it's actually been quite a
Yep.
ride. I had many different careers. I think the statistic is that you will have like five different careers
Hmm.
in terms of either different industries or different employers. So I knew I wanted to be a writer before I could read. So that was always my driving force. And it was my great passion and my great love. I didn't know anything about how you become a writer. Didn't know any writers like most people. It's like knowing someone in a rock band or a movie, actor or whatever. It was just not an industry I got any exposure to. And I remember when I was in middle school, seeing a movie from the early 70s called The Paper Chase.
Hmm.
And they were arguing contracts law at Harvard in this classroom. And I remember looking at my mother and saying, I don't know what they're talking about, but I want to do that when I grow up. So I very quickly decided that law would be what I would focus my academic growing up energy towards. So I did English literature at undergrad because I got great advice from my father, which is study in undergrad the thing you're best at and you love the most because
Mhm.
they don't really care at law school what you study in undergrad. And it was true. So I was very lucky. And then I went to law school and I practiced law for a few years. And I knew I was ambivalent about law as a career, but I loved everything about the legal industry. I remember very distinctly thinking, I wish I could just talk to lawyers all day long. And ironically, became one of the first legal recruiters in Canada because it was late at night and I was looking at the Ontario Reports paper copies. It was 1997. And there was this ad, ZSA has come to Canada. And I recognized the name of the gentleman at the bottom of the ad as someone I'd been networked into earlier that year when I was ambivalent, becoming increasingly ambivalent about practicing corporate securities and M&A in a tech boom. And I called him up at 7 o'clock from my desk at Osler and I said, I don't know what you do, Warren, but I think I'd be really good at it. And he said, can you come in right now? And I did. And I interviewed at 8 at night and I got a job offer the next day. And I went into legal recruiting. Ernst & Young was one of my clients and one of their clients, and they were looking for someone to head up a law firm they were starting in the late 90s. And I moved into EY. Great company, loved every minute I was there and did human resources, all facets, but also a lot of hiring. And then the last three moves, I moved to the country where my husband had a trucking company with a 4-hour commute to King and Bay. And I was introduced by Michelle Gage, who was the PD head at Norton Rose, to a woman who was starting up a consulting company right around the time I had a baby. And I joined her company and did career coaching basically in the legal industry primarily for decades and did that. And then I had a point where I was becoming an empty nester. I could see the future. And I was like, this is great, but it's part-time and I have capacity. And I'd always wanted to have a bookstore. So I opened a little bookstore in Oakville, Ontario. This is around 2015. And I did that while I coached.
Wow.
And then I wrote this book called The Jane Austen Society in 2018. And then that led to a writing career for the past, I guess, 6 years now. So that's my story.
How incredible. I've got to ask, is the bookstore still around?
No, we were only able to run it for a year because in a stroke of bad luck, 4 months after we opened, my husband was diagnosed with a very rare and terminal form of lung disease called idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. And at the time, he's on experimental drugs, he's stable, he's outlived the statistics. But at
Yeah.
the time, with a 14-year-old, he was given 2 to 3 years to live. And because I had this other job that was generating income as a career coach, I was working 24/7 running the shop and
Yeah.
going downtown to coach. So I had to wind down the shop, unfortunately. But it
Oh,
was
that
so
what
much
was,
fun while we
oh,
had it.
I could imagine. And
Yeah.
did you think when you were taking English literature in university that you would one day be an author? Was that a plan that you had or
I
not
mean,
exactly?
I remember very distinctly thinking, I mean, I always wanted to be a writer and wrote, but law is a demanding
Mhm.
master mistress, right? Like you get into it and you really have to give it a lot of time and energy. So what happened with me was from undergrad trying to get the marks to go to U of T Law, then being at U of T Law, then getting on that path of summarizing and articling, all that stuff. And this is like 90 to 97, let's say. That whole path is very demanding. And so I
Yeah.
remember when I left law, I was 30 years old, and I said to myself, okay, now you have that time to write that book that you always wanted to, but that I'd had to kind of ignore since my late high school years when I was
Mhm.
trying to kind of get that academic career record behind me. So that was how that came about. I sat down when I was 30 and I wrote a really bad book that's in a drawer. And then I wrote four more really bad books that are also in a drawer. Yeah, and I did that for a long time. And then I took a long break, over 10 years, and didn't write at all. And then I'll tell you guys,
And here we are.
yeah, we are.
So those three books that are published right now are not your first three
Oh God, no,
books, in fact.
no, they're
Ah,
my.
interesting.
I think I just finished my 10th book. So my seventh, eighth, ninth, my sixth, eighth, ninth, and 10th books will be published, and my first five are in a drawer, and my seventh is sitting with my publisher in a drawer. Which is
How
not as bad as my drawer at home because it's like they're not moving on it either. It's modern, it's set in modern times. And one of the things I would share with anyone interested in becoming a writer is that at a certain level, genre is very important. It's very important for marketing. It's very important to help you stand out in a very, like, thousands of books get
yeah.
released, all the time. So every year. So yeah.
So committing to a genre is really important. Now, let me
Well,
ask, no?
they no, I mean, it is to them. I don't think
Right.
any writer wants to necessarily do it, but the business imperative is we need to find a way to market you. And so backs on the books, people
Hmm.
see it in the bookstore, they know it's historical fiction, no confusion. They're
Fair
not going
enough.
to open it thinking it's a thriller,
Or a modern book,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Natalie, let me ask you, because a lot of what you did was very intentional. You went and did English Lit so that you can get grades to go into law school. Law school, work hard so you can get into practice.
Yeah.
Um, how about serendipity? I often ask this question. You know that I like the word serendipity. How, if at all, did serendipity play a role in some of the career journey that you've had?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think there's somebody once said that serendipity increases in relation to sociability.
Mm.
And I think that I do feel I've had a lot of luck, but I also do feel that meeting so many different people, both as a career coach and, working, for example, in a large law firm with, like, hundreds of other lawyers, et cetera, that all these experiences exposed me to so many people that I found that later in life paths crossed just like very easily. I do think, I can say it was serendipity that I became one of the first legal recruiters in Canada. When I shared that story with you earlier, I didn't need to be looking at jobs at 7 o'clock at night in my office in the Ontario ports. I probably shouldn't have been, but I was really trying to find a job. So I was trying to, like, leave no stone unturned. Um, but I went to every coffee that anyone set me out on, just how I met the gentleman whose name was on the bottom of the ad. So it's all those experiences. There's a lot of luck involved, but a lot of it is just being very open, never,
Mhm.
like, really not saying no to meeting, new people, opportunities to connect with people. I found that people would ask me to meet someone, chat with them because they're confused about their career. And you don't do it a billion the time, right? You do it like you're helping your friend. And then I just found that that kind of energy came back. So I do think that with getting published, specifically in terms of serendipity, that I was very lucky that my agent, Mitchell, who's still my agent, asks for 50 pages when you submit a manuscript to him. A lot of agents ask for 5 to 10. And I was very lucky that the gentleman who loved Jane Austen related work and was going to get my email saying, former indie bookshop owner and lawyer,
Mhm.
has, written this book, The Jane Austen Society, and that's my query line. And I hit 3 things he was interested in because he'd gone to law school in New York. So
Oh,
former lawyer,
interesting.
former
Mhm.
indie bookshop, and then Jane Austen. And
Wow.
I remember when he signed me, we talked on the phone, and he said, I get dozens of Jane Austen related queries a month. Queries are people sending him books.
Mhm.
I'm trying to get an agent. Here's my book. He goes, and I don't think anyone's done World War II before. So in the biggest stroke of luck in my life, the real Jane Austen Society in real life had started in 1940 and was not able to raise money because of the war to open a museum in the cottage where Jane Austen had lived and wrote. They ended up opening it 2 years after the war because a gentleman, T.E. Carpenter, a lawyer from London, had lost his son in battle in World War II. The father was a huge fan of Jane Austen, and he bought the cottage for £3,000 outright and donated it to the nation. And then the nation, in conjunction with the Jane Austen Society that had been formed in 1940, opened it as a museum,
Wow.
I think 80 years ago now. And I set my story in 1945, 46
Mhm.
in homage to this real life Jane Austen Society, but my characters are all made up. My society is fictional. But I picked that time period, and I think that was the greatest stroke of luck in my life.
Wow. And so you didn't know that this person who would become your editor was a lawyer, was interested in, did you know those things about him when you emailed
I
him?
mean, I knew he had represented other Jane Austen books, which is why I
Right.
had applied to him. But I
Hmm.
don't think I'd known he'd gone to law school. He's my agent. He's not my editor.
Sorry, your
I
agent.
don't, no, it's fine. I don't think I knew he'd gone to law school. It was really that he had represented Jane Austen related work. That was
Interesting.
why I wrote to him. So
And did you know that he was a bookstore owner beforehand?
no, he wasn't a bookstore owner, but he was interested in the fact that I was a bookstore owner.
Got it.
So he's interested in the three things I put in my query
Got
email.
it.
And the reason he's interested in that is because there are a lot of former bookshop or current bookstore owners, primarily in, I'd say in the States, who have gone on to sell books to
Interesting.
publishers and get published. And there's a real market. Like indie bookstores love other indie bookstore owners.
I love
So
it. I
you
love
get
it.
a built-in interest from the indie bookshops if you have worked in one. So
That's fantastic. So the Ontario report's definitely a serendipitous moment. And your comment, for those who are watching who don't know what the Ontario reports are,
oh yeah,
we used to receive the Ontario reports in
a
paperback,
little white
every
Bible, like a
little white
small little
Bible
thing.
every
Every
single week.
Wednesday, it would come to your mail tray on your desk.
It's such a, that's the one thing that I find is such a shame that it's just done online right now, because that, we all used to look forward to the Ontario reports. From that to the email and to specifically what you added in your subject line, very, very serendipitous. So I really do appreciate the way that that has played out in your career. So let's turn to the book, because your last your current role, not your last, but your current role at least, is that of author. And this book in particular, it's the third published one, but your eighth, as you said,
Ninth.
your ninth one. In this book,
Yeah.
what's your why? Why did you want this book to be written? Why did you need to research it, to write it, and to share it with the world? What was important about it for you?
Think for me, I mean, started thinking about this book in April of 2021. So if we think back that long, that was in sort of like the end of the first sort of big year of the pandemic, vaccines were becoming available, et cetera. So we were still in relative lockdown, and my husband, particularly being at highest risk with his lung disease, we still weren't really re-engaging yet with the world in the way that that we can now, thank God. And I remember at that time being very cognizant of the sacrifices everyone around us was making to keep my husband safe. Bloomsbury Girls, my second book, I think a lot of people at the beginning of the acknowledgements, a lot of pharmacists, doctors, friends, lawyers, neighbors, etc., because people were doing our grocery shopping for us, and just all this stuff was going on. And it was a time where I remember thinking that we were very fortunate to be able to keep safe to the extent that we were. And having had to do a lot of research into World War II through my first two books, my books always take place at the end of war or in the post-war period, because I am very interested in how we move forward when the trauma is behind us, as opposed to plumbing the depths of the trauma. I think particularly given our taxed personal health situation with my husband, I want to be in a world where people are figuring it out. And I get energized by that. So
Mhm.
that's usually the time period focus of all my books, is that they will take place after war. But in 2021, in the spring, I'm coming out of this sort of pandemic, everyone helping us, and I'm thinking about the sacrifices made during World War II. And I'm realizing that a character from Bloomsbury Girls has an unfinished backstory has lost a fiance who's gone missing in North Africa, and she will not have any idea what happened to him, but he's being presumed killed in action. And it's the 1950s and everyone's moving forward. And I thought it would be really interesting to explore how you move forward when you lose the chance to say goodbye to somebody, and the
Mhm.
value of saying goodbye. And I think that that also was ironically a theme I wanted to explore, that was also coming from that first year of the pandemic, because you might remember there was these heartbreaking stories of families not being able to be together when someone was passing away in the hospital, because only two people would be allowed in the room. And I just remember being very affected emotionally by that, thinking on top of everything else, this incredible period of loss in your life, that you are not able to be present, with both your children, say goodbye.
Mhm.
So I remember thinking that that was an incredible like pain on top of pain. And I thought that there was a parallel. So I wanted to explore that theme of losing the opportunity to say goodbye, how you move forward when you don't get that closure. and the small and big sacrifices that people make in difficult times, such as the global pandemic, but also the resistance in Italy during the Second World War, which was an incredibly complex time. They had many different factions vying for power. And you've got Mussolini, and you've got sort of like the north part of Italy with the Axis powers, and then the south part is the Allies come in and they're moving up north, and you've got the resistance, and you've got fascist cooperators with Mussolini or the Axis powers. It's just really complex. And I really thought it was something I could really dig my teeth into, and it would give a lot of sort of richness
Mhm.
to some of these themes. So
I love the two themes that you've indicated, but let me ask you this, apart from those two, not apart, you you present those two themes with cinema and with cinema in essence, right? I was gonna say with fashion, but no, not fashion, but with cinema. Why did you, and I'm using cinema as opposed to the movies because that's sort of the era of the time. Why was that of interest to you? What made you pursue that area or that um, tool
yeah,
to tell the
no, I mean,
story?
it found me because what happened was
Ah,
that as I was starting to think about writing about Vivian again, something had happened. The character who's lost her fiance, something had happened where I'd seen a movie by Francois Truffaut called Day for Night. And I remember after watching that movie going, on Wikipedia to look something up, and I went into a rabbit hole and I learned for some weird reason, I got onto Cinecittà, the famous Rome movie studio, and I learned that the studio had been used after the occupation as both an international and an Italian refugee camp. And that those camps actually, the international camp stayed open long after the war. So I'm immersed in this Truffaut movie. I'm thinking about film, and I trip across this information that refugees were living in the studios in makeshift cots with curtains, and just in Teatro 5, which is where Fellini is going to film, 8.5 of these like incredible movies. In the 40s, they were living in movie studio.
wow.
And I thought that was so mind-blowing to me, that people with absolutely nothing, refugees with lost their families in the Holocaust, they were completely displaced. They have just the clothes on their back. They've been separated from everyone they love, and their language, everything is gone. And they are suddenly on it, like living on a soundstage.
Yeah.
And there was something very intriguing to me about that made me go, I think I want to make this book set in Cinecittà, set in La Dolce Vita of the 1950s, when the world is kind of really celebrating film
Mhm.
at a high level, like probably the apex of the Hollywood golden era. And so that's why film.
Wow, that's beautiful. And I want to ask you about your process because part of this is, this is book three in a related books, but not necessarily sequels. How did you go, apart from the Wikipedia rabbit hole that you just described, how did you go about researching this, both in terms of the geography and the history, but also about theater? Were you a connoisseur of theater
Yeah, no,
beforehand?
I actually minored in film studies at
Ah,
UC.
okay,
So
okay,
I have a very deep love for cinema and knowledge base. I'm
okay.
very fortunate to have acquired. In fact, my film Professor Tolton, and I, he's thanked in the Jane Austen Society as one of my handful of really influential teachers and professors. And he now reads my books. It's very sweet. He emails me lovely, lovely sentiments after each of them. So I definitely, from that perspective, had the knowledge.
Yeah.
Um,
It wasn't
but
brand new to you.
it was not
Yeah.
brand new at all. But in terms of research for me is, I don't like research. If I liked research, I would have studied history. I studied English literature. I'm in love with plot, character, theme, atmosphere. I just want to read novels all day long. So I do research at the beginning intensively for a couple months, 1 to 3 months. And what I'm trying to do during that time is get a sense of what was at stake for people. So the way you have to get that is you have to know like the time period in which they're living geographically, where they're living culturally, where they're living, and then because that's what's going to set up barriers for people. So in Bloomsbury Girls, the 3 women working in a bookstore are never going to be management positions because that's what it was like for women in the workforce, very, Mad Men-esque. So research at the beginning for me is just to get me to the point where I understand where it's taking place, when it's taking place, and what's at stake. Once I know those 3 things, I just start to write.
Okay.
And then as I'm writing, I will need to do research. It will come up, right? So I will write, and a lot of my friends who are historical fiction writers will tell you this. You'll be writing and you'll be like, did they have transistor radios in 1945? And you'll Google it and your morning will go. And like you'll be like hours will go and you'll
Mhm.
be making notes. And I have a research document that's almost as long as my book. And it's just links, hyperlinks, and copy and pasting information. And I do the research only to support the story at
Mhm.
this point. In other words, I only put things in the book, research-wise, intentionally. They are in there for a reason that has to do with either advancing plot, theme, atmosphere, or character. If they don't do one of those 4 things, they're not getting in my book. The
Okay.
book is not a research text. It's supposed
Mhm.
to be entertaining.
Mhm.
It's commercial fiction. So it's supposed to kind of engage the reader, hopefully, and keep them going. And so the research is only from my perspective as a writer, is as a fiction writer, is only there to support those 4 elements of the story.
So I have to ask you, because the way you've written this book in particular seems like you have walked every corner in Rome that you describe, have visited the studio. Did you actually physically go there?
Not during the writing of the book, but Rome is probably my favorite city. So we
Ah,
had been there several times as a family or as a couple, my husband and I, before we were married, after we were married. We've taken our daughter twice. And
mhm.
so all the places that I mentioned that are captured in a map at the front of the book that was designed by an Oakville artist, all of the places on that map are places that are important to my family and I that we visited. And so this book, by having those places in the book, I was able to revisit.
Beautiful,
Yeah, there.
beautiful map.
I was able to revisit these places that were very meaningful to me.
How
And so
wonderful.
the book functioned also for me as a travel log that way. So I was very
That
lucky.
that is phenomenal. So one of the themes, Natalie, that comes up in your book a couple of times, and it starts off this way, is that of feedback. And it starts off with Vivian reacting to her opening reviews, right? I wonder, given your work both as a writer, what can you share about the process of receiving feedback? Because many of us don't like getting feedback or we don't think about it. And we're not really oftentimes good at giving feedback to people. Oh, that's good. That's what is it that your prof said? That's lovely. Maybe he'd give you other feedback, but I'm just wondering what thoughts you have about receiving feedback as an author, and especially receiving potentially, if any, negative feedback or negative reviews.
Well, it's interesting because I think this is separate from people that are dealing with the workplace because I think the workplace is a team effort. And I think that it is important that different communication styles be respected and that I remember I listened to a lot of podcasts on creativity and there was these 2 writers for a TV show and they didn't get any praise at all from the showrunner. And the show was going on the air. And the guy was walking along like with the showrunner, the script writer, and he's like, so do you like our script? And the showrunner trying to goes, well, it's going on the air. Like, so they knew never to ask this question again. Like that's his communication style. And I think that your job in like the workplace is to understand the communication style and to not overly personalize it. As a creator on your own who needs to self-motivate and will hit barriers with the act of creation that will be difficult and that you sometimes have to walk away, come back to the story. But it's all self-generated. Nobody is making you go to work. Nobody is telling you how to do it. It is completely coming from your noggin. And
Mhm.
so in that scenario, I adhere to what one of my favorite film directors, Wes Anderson, says. And he did the Grand Budapest Hotel and many other movies. He said, if I listen to the good reviews, I have to listen to the bad. And the trouble with good reviews, and I know this for a fact, is when you get a great review, it's like a hit. It goes right through you. It's wonderful,
Mhm.
but then you want the next hit, right? But the bad reviews stay in your head forever. So the bad phrases, like I've been translated in many countries around the world, and there is a man in Bulgaria that said that I am a vampire who has sucked the life out of Jane Austen and has basically only gotten published on the back of Jane Austen.
Oh no.
And kindly translated this into English and posted it on social media and tagged me to how I know.
Oh
And so
no.
I remember reading that, and I looked at my husband and I said, I don't think I should ever read a review again because you just don't, you know. And so what I learned was it's true though. If I'm going to pay attention to the good, I have to pay attention to the bad. And I've learned that the bad doesn't motivate me as a creator.
Hmm.
Maybe it motivates others, although I would venture to say that based on my friendships with other writers, we would all agree that it tends to actually suck energy out of you. It doesn't, you know, it's very different from the workplace, this kind of
Hmm.
reviewing. And so I have learned that it's better for me, and I can only speak for myself, is to realize that the act of reviewing is its own creation. It is separate from what I've done. I have written the story and I've given it out to the world, and now it belongs to the reader. It belongs to the reviewer, it belongs to the critics, and they're going to take from it what they need to, want to, can. And
Hmm.
that's got nothing to do with me. And it's not for me to interfere with them either. I should respect the fact that people are going to read what I write and have different responses to it. Margaret Atwood says you will never write a book that everybody likes. So
Yeah.
if you go in knowing that, then it's really none of my business if other people don't like my books. And what I mean by that is I can't personalize it or get upset by it. All I can do is when I sit down, just keep doing my best. Um, I write because I want to find out what's going to happen because I don't plot. So
Wow.
writing for me is a fun little race, and I'm writing to figure it out. And I'm very happy when I write. And that is the thing I stay focused on. And the reviews are a whole other side universe that's taking place that I just choose not to wade into because it just doesn't help me as a writer.
I find that interesting. How did you write Vivian's reaction then? Was that sort of based on your experience
Oh
or
God,
was
yeah.
that
Yeah, no, no.
okay?
That's
So
exactly
Vivian
how you feel. When it comes
um,
out and it flops and nobody wants to tell you and your team lies, everyone's sort of like ducking for cover and no one wants to say anything. Oh yeah, no, I knew exactly how that felt. I was very much channeling. And also, not to spoil the ending, but and I know that you know that you read the book. Um, but part of what I was doing with this book was deciding what is the best way to tell a story.
mm,
And, you know, a lot of people have, you know, asked me like, oh, do you write short stories? Or have you thought of writing nonfiction? Or have you ever thought of writing for film and TV? And I'm like, no, I can do one thing. I can write a novel. I can write a 300 or 400 page sucker with a multi-character universe, and I can do it for months and I'm happy. That's what I do. I can't do anything else. I can't do poetry. I can't do plays, etc. They're all very, some people can't, but
mhm,
they do call on different skills. And what I wanted with Every Time We Say Goodbye is I wanted somebody who had started out as a playwright because
mhm.
she had a gift for dialogue, which is something that I'm told is one of the things that people enjoy about my writing is my dialogue.
Yes.
So that's Vivian. She's got a gift for dialogue. It's going well. So theater makes sense. And then it's not going well. And do you pivot? Like, what do you do? Right. And so she joins this filmmaking team and works as a script doctor, which is something that, you know, Elaine May has done, Nichols and May, and Carrie Fisher did, the late Carrie Fisher, where you're not publicly attached to the project, but you are behind the scenes helping fix it, fix the script. So that's what Vivian's doing. She's sort of like behind the scenes now, biding her time. But her journey in this book, beyond finding what happened to her lost fiance, beyond making peace with some very difficult decisions that she's made in the past, that all come to a head in Italy. The other thing she's figuring out is what is the best way to tell the story of the schoolgirl assassin. And that
Mm,
is of the 46 or so chapters in the book, 6 take place in 1943, 44, involving the schoolgirl assassin who's based on a real woman, Carla Capone. And she would later become the head of I think, the Communist Party of Italy. But when she was a young woman, she went out into the night and hunted Nazis and shot them point blank and assassinated them. And I was really fascinated by that. So I have this secondary, or what's called a dual timeline, and Every Time We Say Goodbye. And its function is this is a movie that they're working on about her, but it's not going well. and it's probably not going to get made. And is it the best way to tell her story? Because the last thing to say, Gina, about all of this is the biggest decision I think you make as a writer is voice. It's who's telling the story. Is it the first person voice? I walked down the street, I saw a murder. Is it that? Is it what I do, omniscient narrative voice, which is what Jane Austen pioneered, free indirect discourse, which is it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of good fortune must be one of a wife. And then we go into Mr. and Mrs. Bennet's heads, right? But there's somebody telling the story. And that's how I write. I love to write that way. So the decision of who's telling the story is very important. It's the first thing that you have to decide. And it's what part of Vivian's journey in this book is deciding who should tell the story of the schoolgirl assassin.
I love the dual nature, right? You've got two stories in essence in one. And I simply saw it from a non-technical perspective as going back in time and hearing the story. But to hear you think about it and speak about it in the technical way is really fascinating. And I also, from a career perspective, um, was fascinated with her career choices and her career pivots and her decision to how does she apply her skills in a way that's different so that she leaves one area and moves into something else. So it was Vivian's a fascinating character. I liked her in the second book, and when I saw that this is who you were writing about in the third book, was really glad to see it. And your conversation about feedback just briefly brings back two thoughts to me. First of all, the reminder, and I'm glad that you shared it with us, that you've got a bunch of unpublished books in your drawer, right? That is feedback, and that sort of people will see your success with these novels, and they, oh wow, how wonderful! She got them all on her third, on the first try. So knowing that there was some earlier efforts beforehand is really useful. And you talked about the creative versus the workplace, and I oftentimes link what we do as lawyers as a creative element as well. There is a bit of creativity to it. So some of what you discussed, I think, of course, you're going to take feedback from a supervisor, a mentor in the early years or later on, but how you described your relationship to it, I think it's input that we all need. Some of us can relate to it and can take the harsh feedback. Others need only the good feedback, but I think it's information that we can or cannot decide what to do with as we move
And I
forward.
think for me as a creator in the creative industry, I get feedback all the time from my agent, my editor, that I
True.
treat like the Bible. Like
Ah,
they're so good at what they do. Like when my agent I'll say, I'm thinking of writing about. He's like, don't do it. Like, please don't. I I'll just text him and I'll be like,
yeah.
I have an idea, or I have an idea for a title or whatever. And he's just really honest with me. And my editor is the same way. There's no currency for them in pussyfooting around
Yeah.
this act of writing. Like their job is to help me make it the best book that it can be, vis-a-vis being my editor, my agent. And so they have to be brutally honest,
Mhm.
but I appreciate that because I know what their goal is.
Yeah.
Their goal is we want to sell as many books as possible. We
Yeah.
want you to keep writing. And
Mhm.
that is, I am very lucky that I have two people giving me brutal feedback whose goal is not anything other than my success.
Yeah. Yeah.
So and the more candid, the better. So, again, it is very different from like a sort of different
Yeah.
kind of professional job. So my advice is very kind of limited, I think,
No,
to
I appreciate that. I had to take a quick look when you said the titles. I don't know if you meant the book title or chapter titles. I thought you don't have chapter titles, do you? And I don't think I saw chapter titles in the book. Um, so let me ask you, one of the things that struck me from this story in particular, you talked about power in various ways. It kept coming up in a number of ways. And early on in the book, one thing that I noted is Vivian's conversation with the cardinal and about her script change. And she speaks of all men's eyes on her and social power. And then later on page, I think it was 48, she talks about standing up to power and gaining begrudging respect. I think it was from the cardinal in particular. What similarities do you draw from the worlds of creative endeavors and of law with regards to power?
well, that's a really interesting question. Um, the thing about law that's so different from like the filmmaking industry is that it's a meritocracy. Like you don't get through the door without going to law school, right? You don't get to go to law school unless you've worked hard, have a certain like level of intelligence. So what's fascinating is that most of the people that you work with in a law firm environment, in the legal industry are somewhat similar to you. And you're usually working for people and alongside people and delegating to people that are at least as intelligent or more intelligent than you, right? So it's a really empowering and really energizing industry to be in. Everyone's sort of like good, top of their game, etc. So in filmmaking and some of the creative arts, there's a lot that goes into success, and some of it is very visual. Some of it has to do with like star power and charisma, etc. So it's not necessarily a meritocracy in terms of the best actor getting the job, right? Sometimes it's the hottest actor who is almost as good as acting. So that's a very different power matrix. And so, I see a huge difference between the two industries in terms of power, but the similarity is in that hierarchy. And it is very much a triangle of working your way up and paying your dues. And there's not a lot of lateral mobility. It's very much an up or out model. And so what's similar for me, for example, is with each book, if the sales aren't there, you're out. You lose your publisher and you've got to go find another publisher. And the other publishers look at the sales and go, oh, well, these sales aren't very good. And so it actually can become harder to get published. This is something I would share with anyone interested in getting published, is if you get published and that first book doesn't do well because the publisher that you were lucky enough to get can't really market you, doesn't have that, that bench strength to market you and get the word out about your book, and your book kind of like, kerfuffles. It will be very difficult to get published again.
Oh, wow.
Because everyone can go on BookScan and see your sales.
So first choice,
No matter
first choice.
how good the next book is, they're like, well, the first one didn't do well at all. And that's different in the 60s and 70s, especially in American publishing in New York City with the big five. There was a cultivation that went on, which is, okay, you're, William Styron, you're going to write Sophie's Choice. Well, right now we're working with you and your book hasn't, it's kind of like not done super great, but you're a genius and we're going to keep working with you. And you would have this chance to keep writing. I'm talking about the greats, not me. I'm talking about the greats and the Toni Morrisons. And so what's interesting is that it's become even more of an up or out model. And so kind of similar to Not Making Partner. And so there is actually a real similarity there with the power base.
Were you intentionally wanting to talk about power for Vivian and for your characters in the book? It seemed like it was a big theme, or was it part of the story?
It just came about kind of organically that she's in Italy, and that I know that the Vatican has an outsized influence on Italian society, because in doing my research, I had read about the priests going in and taking the children out of the movie theater, like literally like pulling them out, and going, you're not allowed to watch that. And I remember thinking that there was this sort of underlying kind of connection with the church, either visibly or hidden, of tremendous power that she was just necessarily going to have to wrestle against. I think the reality is that when you write, and often half my characters are men in my books, but in a couple of books, Bloomsbury Girls and this one, every time we say goodbye, because the main characters are primarily women, which is not the same with my other two books, but because of that, and it's the 1950s, 40s and 50s, we are talking about a time of seismic change in where women are going to be heading, right? They're going to go from having, especially in Italy, they did not have the vote until after the war. So, they were charged twice as much in Italy, and under the Mussolini regime, women were charged twice as much as men tuition at university. Wow. The goal was to keep women in the home, having children, and the laws reflected that. So because I've set my books in this time period of 45 to 55, my female characters are inevitably just going to come up against what is still a fairly, traditional male dominated society, historically speaking. So
it's interesting because one of the things that resonated with me, or that I noticed at least, was strong, powerful, and very uniquely different women. So I was curious because there was Vivian, there's Claudia, you mentioned Peggy Guggenheim, and I don't know if it's the real Guggenheim or if it was just a name. Okay. Tabitha Knight, Sister Justinia La Scala. how do
Yeah.
you say it? La Scaloretta?
The
Is that it?
Scaloretta.
La
Yeah.
Scaloretta.
Yeah.
And so I wondered why it was important for you to include these women and depict them in such a wide range. But as you said, it wasn't intentional just to have the women characters, but it happened in terms of the time frame in that
Yeah,
instance. Is
very
that right?
much, which is what I said at the beginning about research. Remember when
Yeah.
I was talking about research? And I think I might have shared that I need to kind of research for 1 to 3 months before I start writing because I want to be able to understand what's at stake for people in that society at that time. What could they get away with? What were they hoping to achieve? And with my fourth book, which is coming out in May, called Austin at Sea, Boston Blue Stockings. So we've got a women in Massachusetts who are young and their father is on the Supreme Court, the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts. And these are young women who, what are they going to do? Teach,
Mm.
get married, right? Like they're
Mhm.
sort of sitting there and they write to Jane Austen's brother. This is actually based on a real life incident. He's 91-year-old retired admiral, and they end up going to visit him. And this is a time period where in Massachusetts, they had just passed 10 years earlier the Married Women's Property Act, which enabled you, even if you were married, to still be able to keep your wages, write a will, petition for divorce,
Wow.
own a home.
Hmm.
In England, they're not there yet.
Interesting.
They are not going to have those rights for, I think, another 10 to 15 years. And there will be a marriage at sea.
Ah, that's the title.
And if we've got lawyers here, if anyone remembers conflict of laws in first year law, and the concept of renvoi and the passing of jurisdiction back and forth, the entire last quarter of my book is basically a shuttlecock of renvoi going back and forth between two different countries where women have a certain right in one country and they will lose that right if they're deemed to be subject to the law of the other country. It goes back and forth, back and forth. It's light, it's
Incredible.
wrong, but it's my law book. My fourth book is my law book.
I was going to say there's a lot of law in that fourth
Yeah.
book, but although
Yeah.
you do talk about the rights of people in this book very much as well. Let me ask you, because one of the things that comes out in your book, in all three of the books, but this one in particular, in terms of every time we say goodbye, there are a lot of emotional conversations and incidences. Wellness, as we all know, is a key topic for everybody these days, both generally in our society, but also within the legal profession. Natalie, your characters deal with stresses and issues of life and really work things through in their own very different ways.
Yeah.
One becomes a nun, was the
Yeah.
example that you and I talked about.
Yeah.
Others, like Vivian, talks about needing time alone, away from the crowds. I just wonder if what you found as a lawyer and as an author is important to you to maintain wellness. And you've told us, you've shared with us some of your sort of personal situation as well. But how do you find that you maintain wellness when life's challenges arise for you?
Well, to be absolutely honest, I think that the way life works is that as we get older, and I am now in my, easily in my mid 50s, as we get older, I think we do tend to hold on to pain and sort of hold it more closely to ourselves. I think that a lot of people, we become less open as we get older. I think for some people it's the opposite, but I think for a lot of people through the hard knocks of life, and superstition and just sort of like telling people something out loud, right? And then like it gets even worse. And, just all this stuff that happens, I think you start to rely on your inner circle more, like your core loved family members and your core intimates. And I think that for me, what I've learned is through wanting to hibernate to an extent when life gets very hard and your husband's given 2 to 3 years to live, this is not something that you necessarily want to talk about, right? You're just trying to get through the day. So other people want to talk about it to help you. And so what I had to learn to do for wellness is I had to learn to be strong enough to say to people, here's what I need.
Mm.
And if we go out tonight, I'd like to not talk about it at all. Here's what I'd like to do. The corollary of that for me was in terms of wellness is that I've also had to learn to be more open. So yes, I can put some like demands on my friends and family and say, here's what I need right now. Um, but I also need to, I've learned that I feel so much better after I share with others
Mhm.
and also hopefully help them, you know, and whatever, you know, and have that dialogue going. So open communication for me is probably the hallmark of wellness for me because, you know, diet, exercise, sleep, blah, 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 all that stuff, right?
Mhm.
But if you are not feeling connected to others, and if you are not both enabling others to help you and helping others and having that, which is what I loved about coaching, which is why I was a coach for decades. I loved sitting down, having coffee with a stranger, going home and saying to my husband, I am so glad I was the person that person got to meet today. I don't mean that arrogantly. I'm
No,
just like,
I hear
I'm
you.
so glad. Do you know what I mean? Because you know, we do the
Absolutely.
same, you know, I'm just so glad. And that is a really great feeling. And if I do anything ever again career-wise, I think I'll probably go back to coaching because there was just something so energizing and liberating and positive about having that connection with someone. And for wellness, I try to have that in my personal life too, as much as possible. That is just very, I think that's how I approach it.
You know, it's interesting. It resonates with something that one of our earlier authors, she's now a graduate, a law graduate, Taya Mikado, who had lost both her parents before she was 20, and she's written a book on grief. And when we were talking about wellness, one of the things that she said was, it's really important to feel, to get the strength, to feel the confidence, to actually be able to ask for what you want, because people will try and offer you what they need or what they think you need,
You need based on
but
what they need.
based
Yeah.
on what they need. And that could be completely different, difficult and different. And she said, it took me a long time. And I'm hearing you say the same thing, that, you know, asking for what you need is definitely a component of wellness that we've now heard at least two times by two different authors. So I really appreciate that. And I think, you know, that goes to our professional life, to our personal life. Asking for what you need is really important. And sometimes when we are strong characters or strong individuals and we're not supposed to ask for what we need, it's a great lesson. So I'm really glad that you raised that. I've got about three more questions, and then I'm going to open it up to people. But if you have questions, what I would ask is put up your hand with the little emoji sign, and we'll come to you. But Natalie, empathy and compassion. You've expressed those in so many different ways already in the last little bit. How do you create these as a writer in your work? Because that comes up so frequently in your book.
I mean, my characters come to me fully formed and I just don't know their secrets. So it's very easy for me while I'm writing them to feel like tremendous connection and compassion for them. My goal as a writer, in terms of the reader, is to, especially because I have a lot of characters, is to somehow immerse the reader into the consciousness of each of my characters as much as possible, which is why I don't have one or two narrators. I'll have seven, or we'll go into the point of view of like seven or eight different people. Because by going into their point of view, you will understand why things are important to them, and that will build that empathy and that compassion because you'll understand why they're behaving the way that they are. In fact, one of the things I've noticed is that when a character is too stock, and you will have stock characters because you cannot give every character in the book that time that I just described to you. I
What
mean,
does
I'm
that mean to be too stock?
the bad guy. And you
Ah,
don't
okay,
know
okay,
why he's bad. He's just bad,
okay,
right? You
okay.
don't understand what made him that way because you can't give everybody that kind of due in a book. At some point, people will just become more like prototypes.
Mhm.
And people will still wonder, like, I wonder why that person acted the way that they did. So it does become very clear very quickly as a writer that people really need to understand why your characters are behaving the way that they are. And that is my goal, is that people understand each character as an individual with individual wants and needs, who's making mistakes, who's going to learn some lessons. And through watching those characters do that, that people, the reader, will also see different ways to make decisions, different ways to take risks, different ways to learn lessons, and will take something away from the book that will make them perhaps a bit more open to life as well. And that sounds grandiose, but as a writer, you do want people to finish the book and carry something, one tiny little thing away with them. So empathy and compassion, both for my own characters and then to help increase that on the part of the reader are probably my two biggest goals, I think, when I'm writing.
You really do want your reader not just to engage with the characters, but also to take some of those lessons, if you will, out into the world with them. So it's not just the group of people reading your book, but even those who benefit from it afterwards. Uh, um, one of the things that, sorry, I just before I go to the next question, you mentioned the number of characters that you have. How do you keep track of them all? How do you keep?
I don't know how. I don't. Not, I don't have storyboards. I don't
You
have,
don't.
no, I have nothing. I just
Wow.
write, and I just write a chapter a day. And when that's done, I go back to it the next day and I read it again. And I work on it all day, editing it. And then when
Mhm.
I told my agent, I don't write the next chapter until I'm completely happy with the one I just wrote to an extent. And then the next morning I sit down and I write the next chapter. And I, I, I don't know. And in fact, it's interesting because I saw a tweet earlier today where it was it was Bob Dylan. And somebody asked him, where do the songs come from? He goes, I don't know. And I mean, it's kind of the same thing for a lot of writers. Like you don't know where it's coming from. Your creative subconscious mind is, I feel like I'm downloading something. I feel like it already exists. I feel like my job is to kind of get it onto paper in a way that's logical and tight and I edit, I edit in such a way that I try to make my sentences as clean and unfussy as possible. That's important to me as a writer, but I don't really know where it comes from. Hence, I don't have to work to remember it. It's operating, it's coming from somewhere else,
Interesting.
there's no work to remember it because it's not a conscious knowledge. It's magical. It's why writing for me is the most fun I've ever had, because it is a completely magical and mysterious process of what's going on that I don't understand. And that's not uncommon. I think most writers would say that.
So Natalie, when you come up with your characters initially, you don't sort of have a separate tab on your computer that says, Vivian, she's this age and she's this and she's this and she's does that. Wow. Okay. But you still keep track. I mean, you know them. They're in your head and they are now on paper. So those characters just come out. I love that. Some of your characters in this book in particular, and I'd say in a couple of the other your other books as well, they they reflect people who are sort of shut out of opportunities, right, from different things. They're outsiders in different ways, but they find other paths forward. And I wonder if you can share with us, how do they do this? How did you make them do this?
Well, as a former career coach, I'm very interested in how we access opportunity and who is shut out from opportunity. And with Evie, who is a character in the first two books, Evie is a servant who is going to get to go to Cambridge and, have a certain educational life. And it would be tempting and understandable for her in the late 40s to think that I'm the best student, I am doing the best job, this is enough. And what Evie learns, and I think we all learn at some point in our careers, is that sometimes hard work in and of itself is not enough. And you have to work hard, but it may not be enough to get you the thing you want next. So there's other things that you have to also cultivate besides outworking everybody. And that one of those, going back to feedback, is making connections with people and understanding their differences in a way that you can harness them, right? Like for the team, and understanding that people have different communication styles and different facilities, and realizing where you can fill the gaps, and realizing what you bring to the table that's different. And that's the great thing about being part of a law firm, for example, or a company of some kind as an employee, is being part of a team where you can see that there's value in these differences. And that is something that opportunity, like serendipity, increases in relation to sociability. Serendipity leads to opportunity. So opportunity comes about, I believe, when you also build those meaningful connections with others throughout your career. I used to say to people that it was like networking, if we still use the word networking, in your 20s is like investing in a career RSP. And I tell my daughter this, that she's just graduated with her master's and she's entering the working world. It's like, you want to feed it, right? You want to
Mhm.
feed it when you have time and when you're young and you're hungry and you're meeting people and people want to help you and they want to mentor you. And this is a really good time to make connections and to invest in relationships. And that those relationships, to go back to when you asked me at the very beginning about serendipity in my career, every job I ever got,
Mhm.
except for OCIs, was through somebody picking up the phone, knowing about me, or networking
Yeah.
connections that way. And so I think that that is really important in my books, is to show that there are different ways to access opportunity, and to never be so extreme that you shut down from others, or you think you can do it all on your own, or you think you can just outwork everybody, and to pay attention to how other people's work styles are, because we can always learn from others. It's very important to look at the people ahead of you who have what you want, and to say to them, I want to be you when I grow up one day. Tell me your story, like you did tonight with me, right? It's like, how
Mhm.
did you get there, in a
Right.
way? And I think I want my characters in my books to have that curiosity about others. And so I create plots in which very different people with very
Mhm.
different facilities are brought together for the same purpose. And in fact, with the Jane Austen Society, that was the one thing when I sat down to write, I didn't have any kind of outline, but I said, okay, there'll be a teacher, there'll be a doctor, there'll be a farmer. Some people didn't make the cut. There's no history professor. I didn't know there was going to be an auctioneer. I didn't know there was going to be a servant girl.
Wow.
And there was 8 professions. And the Jane Austen Society is about 8 professions, right?
Mhm.
8
Yeah.
different workers coming together, all joined by their love of Jane Austen. Then we go to Bloomsbury Girls, my second book. It's about a group of people in a bookshop, something I just come out of running myself. You have 3 women working in this bookshop, no opportunity for promote,
Mhm.
completely blocked by the male management. And it's not because he's male. Mr. Dutton, who runs the bookshop, is a certain kind of employer. It's not
Mhm.
about male, female. It's about, he's like, here's the rules. Here's how it is. He's just very fixated that way. And they perform a coup and stage a takeover and take over the bookshop from underneath Mr. Dutton and the other men. And then the third book, it was about pivoting in your career and building new relationships and what is a very temporal environment of movie making, because everyone will say with movies, like it's an intense experience, and then the film is done and you move on and you never see these people again. And that is, I wanted to, every time we say goodbye, I wanted to look at an intense work experience in which everyone would disband at the end of it, and what you could get from it in the meantime. So my books really are a lot of, those first 3 books are very much about opportunity.
I have to say, until you said it right now, um, I hadn't actually made the connection about. I felt very sad when the team disbanded. I was wanting them
Yes.
to keep going
Yeah,
together,
yeah, yeah,
but
yeah,
I
yeah.
wasn't connecting it to the title, or that you intentionally had them disband. Because those goodbyes, like I felt I was saying goodbye to each and every one of those characters.
Yeah.
Um, very well done. Again, very well done. Let me just pause. I've got another question for you, but I want to pause and invite anybody else who wants to at this time to join us to ask questions or provide comments about the book or about the process. Tom, is that a hand? Yes. Welcome to Tom from Victoria. Please join us. Unmute. There we go.
Good. Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Tom. Welcome.
Okay. I have a number of questions as usual.
Let's start with
Uh,
one. We'll, we'll go from
okay.
there.
Um, the first question, Natalie, is I know the difficulties regarding your husband, and it sounds like things worked out very well, thank goodness. Aside from that, have you ever had to say goodbye to a fundamental part of yourself in order to move forward? And if so, how how did you deal with that?
A really good question.
I can give you some more if you want.
Yeah.
Let's do it that one.
I had a really lucky life that enabled me to I was very fortunate um, in my family life and my schooling, that I was always able to fully be myself without fear and go after what I wanted. And I think, I mean, I do remember, I mean, my husband had earlier health difficulties. Like he was diagnosed with kidney cancer when our daughter was 2. And I remember that was very difficult as well. It was caught very early. So he was ultimately okay. But that was the first time in my life where I remember having to let go of my sense that um, there's 2 things that happen. When these types of cataclysmic life events happen, there's a before and after. And for me, what I had to say goodbye to with when he was first diagnosed with cancer was the sense of this very, very halcyonic, lovely family life with a toddler. And, we were going to work and everything was very calm and good. And I had to say goodbye to that kind of wonderful, easy life because life very quickly became a very different calendar, right? Of constant scans and surgeries and things. So I remember that was the first time I had to say goodbye to my part of myself. And the part of myself I had to say goodbye to was a very lucky human being. And then the disease that he has now, I mean, it's progressive like Alzheimer's. So it's not a situation where he will ever get better. He will only get worse. So we live with a sort of Damascus over us. So the second loss of myself was something it took me, Tom, a year almost to figure out what had happened. So from the time we got the news that he might have this disease, and it's turned out unfortunately be genetic. So in retrospect, they now know it's what killed his mother and aunt, and he and his brother both have it. And our daughter is impacted. So it's very difficult to live with that kind of knowledge. So the second loss I experienced was, sorry, I get a little emotional, the loss of the future that I thought I was going to have. So the first loss with the cancer diagnosis with my husband was the loss of the day-to-day happy family. And the loss of the future was when you're told statistically your husband has 2 to 3 years to live and you're 47 with a 14-year-old, you are pretty much preparing yourself for widowhood in your 50s. And I realized I was not going to grow old with my husband. So the loss I experienced with that diagnosis, the loss of myself, was the loss of the future that I thought I was going to have, and that I know that most of my girlfriends very luckily, wonderfully still feel that they're going to have. And so
Can I
Not
just,
sure that I
oh,
entirely understand what a life coach is, but is this what directed you in the direction of a life coach?
she was a career coach, if I'm not mistaken, right, Natalie? Or were
yes.
you? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was a career coach. So my career coaching happened coming way before any of these events in life. And it came out of being a lawyer and moving into human resources and consulting back in the 90s. And these events happened in the aughts and in 2016. So back in the 90s, I moved into career coaching, and it was completely targeted, fully targeted at career issues. So I don't have any of the life coaching skill sets that people have.
Tom, before we go to any further question, I want to bring in Parimal for a second for a question that she has. But Natalie, I'm wondering what you so beautifully described, and thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing those 2 losses. Did you draw on those to write about Vivian? Because some of what you described in terms of the lost future seems very much what Vivian experienced, or was that completely unrelated?
No, it's interesting that Tom asked about loss of oneself and how you move forward, because that is probably the underlying theme to my books that I don't process when I'm writing. So writing for me is this joyful exercise. I'm really happy. I love my characters. Everyone's talking and fighting. Things are going on. I'm very happy. And then a long time after, somebody will say something to me and I'll realize, oh, I was using Vivian's story to deal with the loss of a husband and child. And in fact, as I'm saying this to you now, I am just putting it together. So in the Jane Austen Society, there's a school teacher who is pregnant. She has lost her husband in battle. He is gone. And she's going to lose the baby. And I remember, I've never written about anybody in my life, ever. And I remember saying this to my daughter, that none of my characters are based on anybody real. And she goes, no, that's not true. Daddy's in your book. And I
Wow.
go, this is about the Jane Austen Society. And I go, what are you talking about? She goes, well, Adeline's husband, Samuel, who died, that's what you were writing about. And you're worried about me, genetically, right? So, and then I just realized that I explored that same thing again of somebody who is losing their family,
Yeah.
right?
Wow.
So
Wow.
that's what happens with Vivian. She loses her family.
Exactly. Wow, beautiful.
But I just didn't put that together until right this
Until this
second. I had
question.
written about it before. Clearly, I was writing about that kind of loss again. I just
Yeah.
hadn't really processed it.
So this goes a little bit to Parimal's question. Parimal, if you want me to ask the question, do you want to join us? Because I know you've got it in your chat. So I'll just ask it.
Yep. You
Oh,
can
here,
go and ask.
here
You
we
can
go.
ask.
Alrighty. So she says, how do you decide how the book will end? Oh, sorry. Do you decide how the book will end first and then work backwards, or not? What's your process?
So, hi, Parimal, that's a good question. I don't decide. I actually don't know what's going to happen page to page. However, what does happen as a writer is that at some point you see that you have kind of laid the groundwork for yourself. And actually, Kurt Vonnegut, I think it was Kurt Vonnegut said, if you do your job as a writer well, the reader should be able to write the ending. It's not about predictability. It's about having put everything in there. And so as a writer, as I write, I'm putting everything in there. And at some point, I start to see where it's heading. And that's really fun. And the last, I'd say 25% of my books are my climax to resolution. And that last quarter of the book, I will sometimes write in a weekend. You know, I just will go nuts because everything I've written is now behind me and it's coming forward. And it's like a snowball going, you know, down a hill. And so I don't know the ending usually until I'm about to start, like I'm probably at least halfway through when I can start to kind of see where we're going. And but that said, on a macro level, remember I said at the beginning that I need to know the time period and where it takes place and what's at stake. So in the Jane Austen Society, I knew they were going to save Jane Austen's cottage. I knew I was kind of writing towards that. And in Blue Zeri Girls, I knew they were going to take over the bookshop from the men from the time I said. So I knew, I just didn't know how I was going to do it. I had no idea there was going to be an auction. I didn't know anything. I didn't know how they were going to do it. I didn't know who was going to do it. I didn't know the names of the characters. I just knew. But what's interesting is this book, which was the hardest book for me to write ever, every time we say goodbye, and is, I think, the best thing I will ever write. That what was interesting for me was what I thought was going to be the ending ended up not being the ending at all. So I did not know I was going to have a dual timeline, Gina. So
Oh.
I was writing the story knowing they were making a movie about the Skullgirl assassin, but I didn't know her voice was in the book. And I remember I was halfway through the book and I sat down in this like rented farmhouse in my neighborhood because it was, what was it? Was it 20? It was like 2021, 2022. And I sat down and I was just immediately start typing the voice of the Skullgirl assassin.
Wow.
And I wrote 3 pages and I went, what is this? And I called my agent and he said, is it the screenplay? I go, I don't know. I think it's her. He goes, oh, let's go with it. So I ended up writing her. I didn't know I was going to write her voice. So I also obviously did not know, Gina's just finished the book. I did not know that her voice would be involved at the end.
Yeah.
And I did not know any of that was coming. So I'd ended the book. And then I realized how everything was connected. And I got a chill up my spine. And it was all there for me, waiting.
I had to, Parimal, I actually texted Natalie after I finished. I did not see that coming. So,
Yeah.
you know, I know you say that you wanted us to see it or that we could, I thought of some of the
Well, no,
elements.
it's not about being predicted. It's about if you had to, you could take all the information that
Yeah.
exists and get yourself there as well. But it's not
That's
about
right.
being able to guess. And Stephen King says, if you're not surprised while you're writing, how can the reader be?
Love
And
it.
I actually hold to that. I feel that I should be surprised to some extent so that it's fresh. Tom is asking about what a life coach does. So I've never worked with a life coach. Have you, Gina?
I haven't, not a life coach. It's always been
Yeah,
a
no.
career coach. It's always been a
Yeah,
career
I mean, my
coach.
understanding with life coaches is that it's much more holistic.
Yeah.
So the career is one piece, but they will also work with you on diet and wellness, right? They will also work with you on helping you understand how your personal life and your work life may be, interacting or impacting each other, and how to break that apart and how to work on each separately. So that's my understanding, is that it's much more holistic. Whereas with career coach, it was very focused, on what is the issue? Have you been let go? Are you trying to pivot? And it was completely focused on work.
And
Yeah.
in fact, it does. And I want to bring in Ivana, who is a new career coach, but she's got her hand up. But also, sometimes even in career coaching, we will touch on other things that are impacting or impacted by our careers. But the focus is career as
Yes.
opposed to the broad holistic
Yeah.
life coaching.
Yeah.
Ivana, come on in. Thank you. Again, another lawyer and career coach. Please join us.
Thank you, Gina. Now it's really interesting to read your book, and it was so interesting to hear you describe your creative process. And I had many questions. A lot of them Gina already asked, which is very interesting. But I was wondering, is there, in terms of your creative process, I was wondering if there is an order in which you develop your story. We're talking about how you develop your story, how your characters come to life. Do you develop your story based on the characters, or do you develop your characters based on the story?
No,
Or
yeah, no, that's a very good question. It's a very common divide. So I very much am character driven. I feel when I'm writing that I am looking through a camera and I am typing what I'm watching as if it's on a movie set. So I am following my characters. So when my characters show up, I actually feel like I am like following behind them. And there's a Canadian author, Bianca Murray. She says she feels like she's looking out through their eyes as she writes. But we both are following our characters. And I think with writers, you're doing one or the other usually. And so for me, my characters show up, and I just type what they do. And every sentence, every word I put down has to be in service to the plot. So there's nothing unnecessary in my books, in my mind. That doesn't mean that people reading them don't feel that way. But for me as a writer, everything is in there intentionally. And I can only hope that it feels that way for the reader, that there's not wasted space. But for me, everything that I write as I follow my characters has to be engaging, building intrigue, working towards something. But it's very magical. So it is, again, it's very hard to describe how the books happen. What I can tell you is that I have learned to focus on writing to the middle. So in every single one of my books, if you took the book and broke the spine halfway through, there is a scene right in the middle, like page 150 of 300, page 160 of 320, right in the middle, where everybody is brought together on a rooftop patio in Venice, the first meeting of the Jane Austen Society. So I write to the middle, and that is how I kind of keep going when I don't know what I'm doing. Except I do know what I'm doing. I just don't consciously know it, but I have developed, and because I've written 10 books, there's that concept of 10,000 hours with Malcolm Gladwell. I've done my 10,000 hours. And what happens is that the more you write, and the more you write every day, it's a muscle. And what you do is you train it to kick in, and it becomes less work over time. That's why most writers write every day. They just love doing it. You get better at it as you do it. It's not replicative. You get better and better at the beats and at understanding, when do I reveal this information? I was on a panel with Nita Prose, who wrote The Maid, but she was an editor at I think Simon Schuster before she wrote The Maid, and after. And she and I both were saying to the audience that every sentence while I write is asking myself, is this the time for the reader to learn this? Is this too early? Is this too late? Is this necessary? Should I hold it back? I am making that decision, and so is Nita. We are making that decision with every sentence we write. And somehow, Ivana, through the act of that attrition and tightness and leanness as we write, we develop a plot arc. You know, by constantly asking ourselves that question, we actually we kind of come at it from a backdoor way, but we are basically building an arc to a plot.
I love that. Ivana, thank you for that question. Natalie,
Thank you.
before we go,
Yeah.
one of the themes that is in this book and in all your other books, but let's talk about every time we say goodbye, is a theme of friendship, and it's a constant theme. Why is this important for you to explore in your novels?
I mean, I just think friendship is, I think I always say it's like the icing on the cake of life. Like I think that friends are the people that we choose based on shared interests. And I think that your friends, I mean, family is obviously incredibly important, but I think especially in modern life, a lot of people are having to live far from family, and especially because of work. And I do think that the people that you choose to spend your time with, choose to confide in, and who are there for you in difficult times is a beautiful relationship coming from freedom and choice, which to me makes it even like just incredibly unique and special. And I've always loved my friends and felt lucky to have them in my life. So when I write, I'm never usually intrigued by why people have that parent or like sibling relation. That's not what intrigues me. My sort of like nexus for like engagement and intrigue is both romance and friendship, right? Is meeting someone and how you bridge that distance wherever you're coming from, how people end up falling in love, forming friendships, working together with strangers for a greater good. These are just all things that really appeal to me on a plot level as opposed to a family novel. That's just personal. That's just my personal thing that I like to read and write about. So
I just love the different friendships that you had. I mean, Peggy Guggenheim and Vivian would be so very different, and Claudia and Vivian would be so very
Daphne du
different. And
Maurier and yeah.
exactly. And yeah, I also loved how you threw in Gina Lollobrigida and oh my gosh, Sophia
Sophia
Loren, for
Loren.
example. You
Yeah.
know, they came into your book in that way. Um, Before I invite you to maybe share something about your fourth novel, just in terms of getting us ready, let me just ask if there are any other final questions or comments. I know, Tom, you said you had a few. Is there one quick one that you would want to share or to ask again of Natalie?
Uh, it was just if given everything, apart from the health issues with her husband, is there anything that Natalie regrets, like giving up the law to go into writing or
No, you know, I don't
something like
have,
that?
yeah, like I try really hard not to have regrets because I don't really think that it's helpful. But I will say that looking back, I think that I regret waiting as long as I did to write. Just not making the time because I mean, yes, I was a lawyer in a tech boom and it was busy and it was, it was really crazy busy. But the reality is that when I did become a writer, when did I write? I had a baby. I was a stay-at-home mom and a commuting career coach to Toronto from the country. I was writing from 5 to 6:30 in the morning, So that's when I write, to be honest. I write from 4:45 until, 7, 8, 8:30. So that's just when my creative subconscious mind kicks in. And I guess I wish I'd known that. I wish I had known that there is a way to, as a writer, create time early in the morning. It just would have meant not watching Law and Order at 10, right? Like I could have made choices. So I do regret that I waited as long as I did to start writing. I don't regret that I took the 10-year break because it was heartbreaking not getting published. Like I wrote to hundreds of agents, nobody cared about my writing. It was heartbreaking. And I think I needed to walk away on that one. So I regret not starting sooner and building the muscle and the resilience of the muscle earlier in my life. I think that would have helped me get through the sort of like the rejection period. But I don't regret taking like a 10 plus year break from writing because it enabled me to, I think, like start the bookshop and do other things. And all those things somehow led to the Jane Austen Society, and then somehow led to this career that I have now. So that's the one thing I would share with anyone interested in writing is you pick an 1.5 to 2 hour window. It could be 9 to 11 at night. That's when my daughter writes. You know, you pick a window and you do it every day. And what happens is that your body and your mind will actually expect the act of writing at that time, and they will kick in very quickly. And it will not be that difficult to, even if you're tired, your creative mind will kick in. And so there is a way to find that time, as busy as people are. And I wish that I'd figured that out.
It's
Do
building
you
that
find the
habit.
time to now to relax a bit every day?
Oh yeah. No, once I'm done writing, it's fill the well. It's walk the dogs and bike and kayak and bake and play piano and have coffee with my husband and just all that stuff, because writing itself is intense, but you don't do it for more than 2 to 3 hours, right? It's like anywhere from an hour to 3 hours, creative writing. And then you have to fill the well. And I think for most writers, once that part is done, aside from promotion and social media and other things that you're expected to do, I think your job as a writer is to fill your well. Read great writing, see great movies, and engage with nature and things like that. I think you need to do that to bring something fresh to the page the next day.
Natalie, I think I'm going to suggest that that is something that all professionals do. Yes, creatives in particular, but we've talked about that. And Tom, I know how much of a holistic mindset that you have and how wellness in the legal profession is so important. Heidi Brown, one of our authors from last year, talks about the 9 dimensions of, or the 10 dimensions of lawyers, and being able to fill the well and reconnect with nature, your artistic, in that instance, your artistic bent, your spiritual side are so really important. And I think your reminder to us what people do for their profession, whether it is writing, whether it is lawyering, whether it is something else, coaching, you can only do it for so long until you really need to step back and fill that well. So I thank you for sharing that. I'm going to share the screen with everybody in term, and I'm hoping you see Natalie's website here. Natalie, you've talked about this 4th book a little bit. Can you give us a little bit of information about what to expect, when to expect it, and any other information you want to share on that 4th book as we say goodbye to this book?
Yeah. Well, it's very easy to find information on the 4th book because the cover was revealed a week or 2 ago. So if you Google Austen for Jane Austen at sea, it will come up, and it's available for pre-order. And so you can go onto Amazon, for example, and look up me, and it'll come up as one of my books. It is the story of those 2 daughters of one of the judges of the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, and a transatlantic sea voyage that they're going to take to meet Jane Austen's brother, during which they will meet Louisa May Alcott and a motley crew of people. Louisa May Alcott actually took that boat, the SS China, in the summer of 1865. So again, trying to adhere to some real life cameo characters, but it's a romp. It's a Victorian. It's a salute to the Victorian novel. It's my law novel. I think it's fun. It comes out May 6th, the week before Mother's Day, and it comes out in 2025, which is the last major anniversary in Jane Austen's life that I will celebrate in my lifetime. It is the 250th anniversary of the year of 1775 in which she was born. And that is why I decided to write once more about Jane Austen. And so, yeah, so it's coming out on May 6th, and there's stuff on my website for each of my books if anyone wants to learn more about any of them. So.
How beautiful. I want to thank all of our participants today and those who are watching at a later time for being with us today and for your engagement. Remember that for Ontario lawyers, it is 1.5 hours of professionalism, because we've talked about career and wellness and so many other things that you may not have thought about when reading every time we say goodbye. Natalie, a huge thank you to you for taking us through the highlights of the book, your career, and to offer us hope and inspiration. And I'm going to use Lizetta's words, the reminder at page 318 of that goodness is fixed and steady and not so difficult to spot. And you've just shared a lot of goodness and some magic with us as we've explored this. So our sincere thanks for you joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. It was really, truly a pleasure to be here, and I wish you all the best.
Thank
Thank you.
you. And just a reminder, the next month's, we're going back to nonfiction. Gary Miles, a U.S. attorney who has written Breaking Free. That'll be on October 22nd, 2024 at 7 p.m. normal time, usual time. Natalie, thank you so much to everybody. Have a really good rest of the evening. Really grateful to you. Thank you. Bye now.